If someone had told me a year ago that my meticulously organized, hermetically sealed life, would be irrevocably shattered by Julian Croft, I would have laughed. A dry, humorless sound, the kind I specialized in, because Julian Croft didn't exist in my world. He was a phenomenon, a weather system, a low-pressure front of charisma and golden boy confidence that moved through the university campus while I remained safely indoors, tracking the storm from behind reinforced glass. My life was a grid, a schedule synced across 3 devices. 5 a.m. wake up, 5:30 a.m. pool, 7:30 a.m. breakfast, always oatmeal with exactly 7 almonds. 8:30 morgens organic chemistry. My days were a series of controlled, predictable inputs and outputs. I was a swimmer, technically, just like Julian was a swimmer. But that was like saying a garden snake and a python were both just reptiles. We shared a tank, but we were not the same species. I was a cog in the machine of the varsity team, a reliable body for relays, a consistent performer who never broke records, but also never broke formation. I was a ghost in the water, all quiet efficiency and contained movement. Julian was the water itself. He was the team captain, the one whose laughter echoed off the tiled walls of the natatorium, whose voice cut through the churn of 20 bodies slicing through chlorine. He was a creature of muscle and sun-bleached hair, his shoulders a marvel of anatomical engineering. I watched him. Of course I watched him. Everyone did. From my lane, I observed him as a scientist observes a specimen. I noted the precise angle of his entry on a dive, the explosive power in his kick, the almost arrogant ease with which he moved. He was built for this, for victory, for the adoration that followed him like a slipstream. He was everything I was not, loud where I was silent, expansive where I was contained, effortless where I was effortful, and I resented him for it. A low, simmering heat that lived in my gut. It was easier than admitting the truth. It was easier than admitting that what I felt looked a lot more like longing. He barely knew my name. I was just Leo, a monosyllabic grunt he'd shout during a set if my pace was lagging. There was no recognition in his eyes, just the blank, impersonal gaze of a general surveying his troops. The distance between us was more than the few feet of roiling water that separated our lanes. It was a canyon, a vast and unbridgeable chasm of social standing, of personality, of a fundamental difference in how we were built to exist in the world. He was the sun. I was a flicker of fluorescent light in a library basement, and I had made my peace with that. My solitude was a fortress. My routine was its walls. Nothing got in, until the day the walls came down. It was a Tuesday, a chaotic practice. Coach was in a foul mood, pushing us through a punishing series of sprints. The air was thick with the metallic tang of exhaustion and chlorine. The water was a battlefield of flailing limbs. It happened at the wall. A messy turn, a miscalculation of speed and space. A tangle of bodies. I saw it in slow motion. Julian coming in hot from the opposite direction for a relay exchange. Another swimmer, a freshman, panicking and veering into his path. A collision. But it was my own follow-through, my arm reaching for the wall in a blind, exhausted lunge that did the real damage. My hand slammed into Julian's shoulder at a brutal, unnatural angle. There was a sound, a wet, sickening pop that was swallowed almost instantly by the din of the pool. But I heard it. I felt it, a horrible vibration that traveled up my arm and settled deep in my bones. Julian's face, contorted in a silent scream, was the last thing I saw before he sank. The world erupted. Whistles blew. People shouted. The water around him turned from a clear, chlorinated blue to a confused mess of churning foam. I just floated there, my heart a frantic, trapped bird against my ribs. My hand throbbed. I had done that. My meticulously controlled existence had just violently collided with the one person I had tried so hard to keep at a distance. The fallout was swift. Dislocated shoulder. Torn labrum. Surgery required. Season over. Julian Croft, the sun god of the swim team, was broken, and I was the one holding the hammer. I stood dripping in the coach's office, the institutional gray carpet squelching under my bare feet. The air smelled of mildew and disappointment. Coach Henderson fixed me with a look that could curdle milk. His apartment is a third-floor walk-up, Leo. He can't manage that post-op. Your place is on the ground floor, isn't it? I nodded, my throat too tight to form words. He'll need someone to look after him for a few days. Make sure he's taking his meds, getting him food. You're pre-med, you know the drill. It wasn't a question. It was a command, a penance. He's getting out tomorrow afternoon. Be there, and just like that, the storm I had only ever watched from a distance was being rerouted. It was heading directly for my front door. The carefully constructed grid of my life was about to be washed away in a flood. He arrived like a fallen monarch. His friend, another swimmer from the inner circle, practically carried him through my doorway. Julian was a ghost of himself, pale under his tan, his vibrant energy dimmed to a low, painful flicker. His arm was bound to his chest in a bulky black sling, a cage for the powerful limb I'd seen propel him through the water 1,000 times. He moved slowly, cautiously, as if his own body were a minefield. My apartment, usually my sanctuary of clean lines and minimalist order, felt instantly claustrophobically small with him in it. His presence was a physical weight, sucking the air from the room. He sank onto my sofa, a low groan escaping his lips. His friend gave me a look that was a mixture of pity and accusation before handing over a plastic bag full of prescriptions and discharge papers. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with him. The silence was a third person in the room. It was thick and heavy, punctuated only by the hum of my refrigerator and Julian's shallow, pained breaths. "You need anything?" I asked. My voice sounded foreign, a rusty hinge in the quiet. He didn't look at me. He was staring at my bookshelf, at the neat, alphabetized rows of organic chemistry and anatomy textbooks. "Water," he rasped. I moved to the kitchen, my limbs feeling stiff and awkward. I was hyper-aware of everything. The click of the cupboard door, the sound of water filling the glass, the way my hand trembled slightly as I brought it to him. He took it with his good hand, his fingers brushing mine for a fraction of a second. It was nothing, a fleeting, incidental contact, but it felt like a brand, a sudden, sharp sear of heat that shot up my arm. My breath hitched. "Get together, Leo." It was just skin, just a touch, but it was the closest I had ever been to him. Over the next few hours, a new, excruciating routine began to form. I was no longer an observer. I was a participant, a caregiver. I watched him up close now, not from the sterile distance of another lane, but from 2 feet away on my own sofa. The details were jarringly intimate. I saw the tiny, faded scar that cut through his left eyebrow. I'd never noticed it before. I saw the faint constellation of freckles across the bridge of his nose, usually hidden by sun and confidence. I saw the sheer exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. He wasn't a god. He was just a boy in pain, a boy whose entire future had been thrown into question. The power dynamic, the one that had defined our entire relationship, had been completely inverted. Here, in my space, he was the vulnerable one, the one who needed help. And I, the ghost, was the one in control. "Pills," he mumbled, his eyes glassy. "Supposed to take them with food?" I made him toast. It was all I could manage, my mind a frantic scramble. I watched him try to eat it one-handed, clumsy, and frustrated. A few crumbs fell onto his shirt. Without thinking, I reached out and brushed them away. My fingers grazed the soft cotton of his t-shirt, and underneath it, the solid, unyielding warmth of his chest. Another jolt, stronger this time. My heart did a painful lurch. He froze, his jaw tight. He looked up at me, and for the first time, his eyes weren't blank. They were focused, searching. He was really seeing me. "Sorry," I stammered, pulling my hand back as if I'd touched a live wire. He just shook his head, a barely perceptible motion. "It's fine," but it wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. The air was charged, thick with things I didn't have the vocabulary to name. Later that evening, the real test came. He needed to change his shirt. The one he'd worn from the hospital was stiff and smelled of antiseptic. "Can you?" He gestured vaguely with his good hand, his face tight with a mixture of pain and humiliation. My stomach filled with a swarm of angry bees. This was a line, a boundary of intimacy I was not prepared to cross. but I had no choice. Yeah, of course, I helped him sit up. The process was a slow, agonizing ballet of careful movements. I had to gently maneuver the dirty shirt over his head, my hands brushing against the bare skin of his stomach, his back. His skin was hot, so incredibly hot. It felt like it was radiating heat, a furnace of life and vitality, even in his injured state. I could feel the ridges of his abdomen, the hard planes of muscle under my fingertips. I could smell him, not chlorine and sweat, but something else, something clean and uniquely him. My mind went completely blank. All my meticulous thoughts, my carefully constructed observations, they all dissolved into pure, overwhelming sensation. The texture of his skin, the heat, the scent. I was acutely aware of my own breathing, loud and ragged in the quiet room. My heart hammered a frantic, desperate rhythm against my bones. Don't let him hear. Don't let him know. I finally got the shirt off, letting it fall to the floor. For a moment, he was just sitting there, bare-chested in my living room. The sight was both clinical and devastating. I saw the sharp lines of his collarbone, the powerful curve of his shoulders, the angry purple and yellow of the bruising that was already starting to bloom around his injury. I grabbed a clean t-shirt from the pile his friend had brought. My hands were shaking. "Easy, Doc," he murmured, his voice low and rough. Was he mocking me? I couldn't tell. I couldn't read the expression on his face. Getting the clean shirt on was even worse. A slow, torturous process of threading his good arm through, then gently, so gently, easing the fabric over his injured side, my fingers dancing over his ribs, his shoulders, the nape of his neck where his hair was still slightly damp. Every point of contact was a small explosion in my nervous system. A short circuit. When it was done, I stumbled back, needing the space, needing to breathe air that wasn't saturated with the sheer, overwhelming presence of him. He leaned his head back against the couch cushions, his eyes closed. "Thanks, Leo," he said, his voice quiet. He had said my name, not as a barked order, but as a soft, genuine acknowledgement. It landed in my chest with a surprising weight. That night, I gave him my bed. It was the only logical choice. He needed the support, the space. I took the couch, but I couldn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to the sounds of him shifting in my room. My bed. The thought was an electric current, fizzing under my skin. The fortress was crumbling. The storm wasn't just at my door. It was inside my house, sleeping in my bed, and I was beginning to realize with a terrifying certainty that I had no idea how to survive it. The next 2 days passed in a blur of forced intimacy. I learned the rhythm of his pain medication, the exact way to prop pillows under his arm to give him a few hours of relief. I learned that he hated oatmeal and picked the mushrooms out of his pasta. He started talking, not just requests for water or pills, but real conversation. He asked me about my classes, about the brutal workload of a pre-med student. "How do you do it?" he asked one afternoon, watching me highlight a chapter on cellular respiration. All this memorizing. I'd go insane. "It's just a system," I said, not looking up from my book. "You learn the rules. You apply them." "I'm not good with rules," he said, a ghost of his old cocky smile playing on his lips. "Only with breaking them." I risked a glance at him. He was watching me, his gaze intense. "That's how you win," I replied quietly. "Is that what you think I do?" "Just win." The question hung in the air. It was more than a question. It was a challenge. He was asking me what I really thought of him. I didn't answer. I just shrugged and turned back to my book, my heart pounding. The carefully maintained distance was eroding, washed away by proximity and shared vulnerability. He was seeing me, and worse, he was asking to be seen. On the third night, the sky broke open. It started as a low rumble in the distance, a vibration I felt in the floorboards. Then the rain came, a gentle patter that quickly escalated into a torrential downpour, lashing against my windows. Then, with a flicker and a sudden, profound plunge into blackness, the power went out. The sudden absence of light and sound was a shock. The hum of the fridge, the glow of the digital clock, the faint light from the street lamp outside, all gone. We were plunged into a primal darkness, the only sound the roar of the storm. "Shit," Julian muttered from the couch. His voice sounded startlingly close in the dark. "Stay there," I said, my own voice tight. "I have candles." I fumbled my way to the kitchen, my hands skimming along the walls I knew by heart. I found the emergency candles and a lighter in the junk drawer. My hands were shaking as I tried to strike the flint. The first 2 attempts failed. On the third, a small, brave flame bloomed, pushing back the oppressive darkness. I lit 3 candles and placed them on the coffee table. They cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, transforming my small, familiar living room into a strange and intimate cave. The world outside had vanished. There was only this small circle of flickering light. And him. He was watching me, his face half in shadow, his eyes reflecting the candlelight. He looked younger, more vulnerable than ever. The confident mask of Julian Croft was completely gone, stripped away by the injury, the painkillers, and now, the dark. "You're prepared for everything, aren't you?" he said softly. "I like to be in control," I admitted, sitting on the floor, keeping a careful distance between us. The rain hammered against the roof. A loud crack of thunder shook the building, and I flinched, a stupid, involuntary reaction. A low chuckle came from the couch. "You're scared of storms?" "I don't like things I can't predict," I said, my cheeks hot with embarrassment. "Me neither," he said, and the humor was gone from his voice. It was replaced by a raw weariness that startled me. My whole life has been a prediction, a schedule, qualifiers, championships, trials. It's all laid out. He gestured with his good hand. Until it's not. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flame of the nearest candle. The painkillers were clearly working, loosening his tongue, blurring the edges of his carefully maintained persona. "The pressure," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's a lot. Everyone expects you to be a machine. They don't see the cost." I didn't know what to say. This was a Julian I had never imagined existed. A Julian who was cracking under the weight of his own golden image. "I used to watch you at practice," he said, and my head snapped up. My heart stopped. "You're like a surgeon in the water. No wasted energy. No showing off. Just perfect quiet focus." "I hated it. You hated it." I croaked, my mind reeling. "I envied it." He corrected himself, his gaze finally meeting mine across the flickering light. "You seemed so self-contained, like you didn't need anyone's approval. You were just there, in your own world. You never looked at me." Oh, the irony. The bitter, painful irony. "I never did anything but look at you. I thought you hated me," he continued, his voice thick with a strange, new emotion. "Every time I'd yell something during a set, you'd just get this look on your face. Like I was annoyance. A fly buzzing around your head. I couldn't breathe." He had seen me. All this time I thought I was invisible, but he had been watching me right back. And he had misinterpreted my fear, my awe, my longing as disdain. It wasn't hate. I managed to say, the words feeling like stones in my throat. "What was it then?" he asked, and he shifted on the couch, leaning forward slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at his shoulder. The small space between us crackled with a sudden, terrifying energy. The storm outside raged, a perfect mirror for the tempest building in my chest. He was closer now. I could feel the heat of him, see the confusion and the pain, and something else, something terrifyingly hopeful, in his eyes. "I don't know what this is, Leo," he whispered, his voice raw. "I've been going out of my mind. My career is probably over. My body is a wreck. And all I can think about is this." He gestured vaguely at the small room, at the space between us. "Being here, with you. It's the only thing that's felt right in months. My entire world narrowed to the few inches that separated our faces. The smell of rain and wax, and his skin filled my senses. The roaring in my ears was louder than the thunder outside. "You're on a lot of medication," I said, a last, desperate attempt to hold on to logic, to my grid, to the world that made sense. "This isn't the pills," he said, his voice firm, cutting through my panic. "This is me. This has been me for a long time." And then he leaned in. It was impossibly slow, a deliberate, questioning movement that gave me every opportunity to pull back, to protest, to retreat into the safety of my fortress. but the walls were already rubble. I didn't move. I met him halfway. His lips were chapped and warm. The first touch was hesitant, a soft, uncertain pressure. It wasn't the frantic, passionate collision I might have read about. It was something far more potent. It was a question, a confession. My mind, my overactive, analytical mind, went blissfully silent. For the first time, there was no observation, no analysis. There was only feeling. The taste of him, the slight scratch of his stubble against my chin, the soft, shaky breath he let out against my mouth. I brought a hand up, my fingers trembling, and rested it on his uninjured shoulder. I could feel the solid warmth of him through his shirt, the thud of his heart beating as fast as my own. The kiss deepened, but it never lost its gentleness. It was a slow, mutual discovery in the dark, an admission of a truth that had been hiding in plain sight, in stolen glances across a swimming pool, for years. He pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against mine. His eyes were closed. "Leo," he breathed, and my name was a prayer, a plea. I didn't know what to say. The words were all gone. So I just leaned in and kissed him again, a silent answer that said everything. The first thing I registered was the light. A harsh, unforgiving morning sun streaming through the gaps in my blinds. The storm was over. My body ached. I was on the couch, tangled in a thin blanket. My neck was stiff, and then memory came rushing back in a tidal wave. The darkness, the candles, the rain, Julian's voice, his lips on mine. My eyes flew open. The apartment was silent. Too silent. I sat up, my heart beginning a frantic, panicked drumbeat. The candles on the coffee table were just waxy stumps. The air was stale. He was in my bed. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. A cold dread, sharp and acidic, flooded my stomach. It was the morning after. The logic, the fear, the part of my brain that I had so successfully silenced last night came roaring back to life. He was on painkillers. Strong ones. He was emotional. His career is in jeopardy. It was the storm, the darkness. It was a moment of weakness, of confusion. He didn't mean it. The thoughts were a vicious, repeating litany. I felt sick. Humiliation, hot and sharp, pricked at the back of my eyes. What had I done? I had taken advantage of him. The caregiver, the responsible one. I had let him kiss me, had kissed him back when he was at his most vulnerable. He was going to wake up and feel what? Regret? Disgust? He would be embarrassed. He would laugh about it with his friends, the story of the weird, quiet guy who he let kiss him when he was high on Percocet. My fortress of solitude, the one I had so carefully built, felt like a much safer place than this new, terrifying landscape of feeling. I wanted to rewind, to go back to being the ghost, the observer. I heard a sound from the bedroom, a groan. He was waking up. Panic seized me. I couldn't face him. I couldn't see the look of regret on his face. I scrambled up, my movements jerky and loud in the quiet apartment. I needed to act normal. I went to the kitchen and started making coffee, my hands shaking so badly I spilled grounds all over the counter. The familiar routine, my anchor, felt alien and useless. A few minutes later, he emerged from the bedroom. He moved stiffly, his face pale and drawn. He wasn't looking at me. His gaze was fixed on the floor. The silence was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The easy intimacy of the night before had evaporated, leaving this thick, awkward fog in its place. "Coffee?" I asked, my voice strained. "No, thanks," he mumbled, still not meeting my eyes. He walked over to the couch and picked up his phone. His movements were clipped, deliberate, closed off. My worst fears were being confirmed in real time. The dread in my stomach curdled into a cold, hard knot. He regretted it. He was shutting me out. He typed something on his phone, his thumb moving quickly. "A friend is coming to get me," he said to the room. Not to me. I shouldn't have imposed this long. "You've got your own stuff to do," imposed. The word was a slap in the face. After last night, after he had peeled back his soul in the candlelight, I was now an imposition. "It's no imposition," I said, the words tasting like ash. He just grunted in response, his attention still glued to his phone. He was building a wall between us, brick by silent, awkward brick, and I was letting him. I was too much of a coward to say anything. To ask, did last night mean anything to you? The 20 minutes it took for his friend to arrive were the longest of my life. We existed in separate, silent orbits in my tiny living room. The space that had felt like an intimate cave last night was now a cage. The buzz of the intercom was a blessed relief. He stood up, grabbing the small bag of his things. He finally looked at me, but his eyes were guarded, distant. The vulnerable boy from the storm was gone. The team captain was back, his armor firmly in place. "Thanks for everything, Leo," he said, the words formal and stiff. "I owe you one." He turned and walked out the door without a backward glance. The click of the lock settling into place was the loudest sound I had ever heard. He was gone. The silence he left behind was different. My old solitude had been a comfortable, chosen quiet. This new silence was a gaping wound. It was an absence. The apartment felt huge and empty, haunted by the ghost of his presence. I could still smell him on the pillowcase on my bed. I could still feel the phantom pressure of his lips on mine. My routine, my fortress, was in ruins, and I was alone in the rubble. The next few days were a special kind of hell. I went through the motions. Pool, class, library, but the grid was broken. My focus was shattered. Everywhere I went, I felt his absence like a missing limb. At the pool, his lane was empty, a still, placid blue line in the churning water. His booming laugh was missing from the locker room. I was back to being a ghost, but it wasn't a comfort anymore. It was a punishment. I had tasted connection, real and terrifying and beautiful, and now the solitude was just loneliness. No text, no call, nothing. The silence was his answer. It confirmed all my fears. It was a mistake, a drug-induced, storm-fueled anomaly. I had to forget it. I had to rebuild my walls stronger this time. But my hands wouldn't cooperate. My heart wouldn't obey. I replayed the kiss over and over in my mind, searching for clues I might have missed. The hesitation, the softness, the way he said my name. It hadn't felt like a mistake. It had felt like a confession. My brain and my heart were at war, and the battle was tearing me apart. On the 5th night after he left, I was sitting in the dark of my living room, staring at the wall. I couldn't study. I couldn't sleep. I was just existing, a hollowed-out version of myself. Then a knock on the door. Sharp, insistent. My heart leaped into my throat. It couldn't be. It was probably a neighbor or a delivery. I wasn't expecting anyone. I ignored it. The knocking came again, louder this time, a frantic edge to it. With a sigh of weary resignation, I got up and walked to the door. I looked through the peephole, and my world stopped turning. It was him, Julian, standing under the dim, buzzing light of the hallway, his good shoulder slumped against the doorframe. He looked terrible, worse than when he first arrived. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his face was pale and unshaven. His arm was still in the sling, a constant reminder of our collision. He looked lost, broken. My hand trembled as I unlocked the door. I pulled it open, and we just stood there for a second, staring at each other across the threshold. Julian? My voice was a whisper. He didn't say anything. He just pushed himself off the doorframe and took a step inside, into my apartment, crowding my space, filling it with his chaotic, desperate energy. I closed the door behind him. He stood in the middle of my living room, not looking at me, just staring at the floor, his breathing ragged. "I'm an idiot," he said, his voice thick and raw. "A fucking coward." I just waited, my heart hammering against my ribs, a wild, hopeful, terrified thing. "I ran," he said, finally looking up at me. His eyes were shining with an unshed emotion I couldn't name. "I woke up that morning and I panicked. I don't feel things like that." He shook his head, a gesture of self-disgust. "My whole life, everything has been simple. Swimming, girls, partying. It's all easy. And then you. And it's not easy. It's terrifying." He took a step closer. So I ran. I went back to my apartment, and I tried to pretend it didn't happen. That you didn't happen. I told myself it was the pills, the injury. I tried to make it make sense. He was right in front of me now. I could see the frantic pulse beating in his throat. "But it was worse," he whispered. "The quiet in my apartment was so loud. Because you weren't there. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. All I could think about was you. The way you looked in the candlelight. The way you kissed me back, my breath caught in my throat. He remembered. He felt it too. I was scared, he admitted, his voice cracking. Scared of what it meant. What you would think of me. What everyone would think. But being scared of that, it's nothing compared to how I felt these last few days. Being without you. The confession hung in the air between us, fragile and powerful. All my fears, all my anxieties, they were his too. We were just two people terrified of the same beautiful, frightening thing. I thought you regretted it, I said, my own voice trembling. I thought it was a mistake. No, he said, his voice fierce. He reached out with his good hand, his fingers gently touching my cheek. His touch was electric, just like the first time, but this time there was no panic. Only a profound, soul-deep relief. The only mistake was leaving. He didn't kiss me. He just stood there, his thumbs stroking my cheek, his eyes searching mine, asking a question I was finally brave enough to answer. Stay, I whispered. The word was an exhalation, a release of all the tension, all the fear I had been holding on to. A watery smile touched his lips. Yeah, I said, my own smile finally breaking through. Stay, he didn't just stay the night. He never really left. In a gesture that spoke more than 1,000 words, he went back to his apartment the next day, with me in tow. He packed a bag, and then he handed me his key. I'm not going back there, he said, his expression serious. Not unless you're with me. It wasn't about the stairs anymore. It was a choice, a commitment, a tangible symbol that he was choosing this, choosing me, over the life he knew before. A new routine began to form, one that wasn't on a grid, one that wasn't synced to any device. It was a fluid, living thing that we built together, moment by moment. It was Julian, his arms still in a sling, trying to make coffee in my kitchen and creating a disaster of grounds and spilled milk, his laughter filling the small space. It was me, sitting on the floor with him, helping him with the gentle physical therapy exercises prescribed by his doctor, my hands guiding his arm, the contact, no longer a source of panic, but of comfort, of care. It was sharing meals, not in silence, but with easy conversation about everything and nothing. It was falling asleep in the same bed, my bed, the space no longer feeling invaded but complete. It was the simple, profound comfort of his warmth next to me, the steady rhythm of his breathing, a lullaby that chased away all my anxieties. The fear didn't vanish overnight. There were moments of uncertainty, of navigating this new, uncharted territory. We were two people learning a new language, fumbling with the grammar of intimacy. But we learned it together. I watched him heal, not just his shoulder, but something deeper. The pressure in his eyes began to fade, replaced by a soft, easy light. He talked about the future, not with dread, but with a cautious optimism. Maybe swimming wasn't his whole life. Maybe it was just the first chapter. And he healed me. He was a storm, yes. A force of nature that had torn through the quiet, orderly landscape of my life. He had smashed my fortress to pieces. But I learned that the fortress hadn't been keeping me safe. It had been keeping me a prisoner. My routine wasn't control. It was a cage I had built for myself to avoid the terrifying, messy, beautiful reality of feeling. Julian wasn't a mistake I had to recover from. He was the plot twist I never saw coming, the disruption that knocked my life off its predictable axis and sent it spinning in a new, more vibrant direction. One morning, I woke up to the smell of something burning. I walked into the kitchen to find Julian, now sling-free but still clumsy, staring at a blackened piece of toast in the toaster with a look of intense concentration. He looked up as I entered, a sheepish grin spreading across his face. Breakfast is a work in progress. I walked over to him, wrapped my arms around his waist from behind, and rested my chin on his good shoulder. The one that was healing. The one that had brought him to me. It's perfect, I said, breathing in the smell of burnt toast and coffee in him. He turned his head and kissed me, a slow, easy kiss that tasted like home. In that moment, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of our shared life, I looked at the man in my arms, the golden boy, the fallen god, the scared kid in the dark, my Julian. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that my meticulously planned life had been nothing but a long, quiet wait for him to come and ruin it completely. And I had never been more grateful.